As a part of the Veterans Day celebration, SYLS would like to thank all of our veterans for their service. Over the next couple hours, we will be learning more about our veterans. Today, we have Brian Boyle. Brian, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Brian, if you could just tell me your name, the branch you served, and how many years of service.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having us. Greatly appreciate supporting the veterans. I'm Brian Boyle. I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey, and I live there now. I'm in Livingston. And I was in college from 64 to 68, but about that time, the Vietnam War was really getting more full steam, if you will. More and more troops were going into Vietnam. The fact that I was in college, I had a deferment. However, like my senior year college really said, hey, you're going to go in, which I did sign up for. I signed up for Officers Training School, Officers Candidate School, and sure enough, I graduated college in May 19th, and within 30 days, I was in Fort Knox, Kentucky, as learning my first day in the military. So like that, I was in Fort Knox. You start off with basic training, which is 8 weeks, extremely hot during the summer there. And from there, I went down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. As a matter of fact, they made a movie called Tigerland. It was just on TV about the training being kind of rough in Fort Polk. It was all foliage, a lot of swamps. I saw a lot of pygmy rattlers. I saw scorpions, so it was good training. However, right after that, I went to Officer Candidate School in Fort Benning, which was in Georgia. And that was 6 months of very good training. So that's how I started. I started in 1968. After going through all the training, which was about a year, I went into Vietnam on March 17th, St. Patty's Day.
Now, did you, you might have said it, did you enlist or were you drafted or how did that work?
I enlisted.
Okay.
I knew I was going to be drafted, so I figured, let me finish college. They were taking kids out of college because I think 68, 69, we had 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam, like that. So
wow. Wow. So now how did you tell your family that you were going to go and enlist?
They knew it. They knew, they read the papers every day, watch the news every night about the war in Vietnam. So, like that.
Were you scared at all?
No, I knew it was coming. So, there's nothing I could do. So, maybe there was a chance I could have gone to Germany or somewhere else, but I just expected it. So, one of the I felt for my parents because I had lost a brother in a car accident in 1964. And there were two other brothers. So here I'm off to Vietnam. But I wrote home, I'm safe, everything's good, I have a good job. Don't worry.
So the key question is, how did your mom handle it when you told her? Did she cry? Was she not happy? Did she understand?
Yeah, she felt bad. She said, you sure you got to go? I said, yeah, I have to go. Funny story, I'm in Vietnam, just get there. And I was allowed to call home. And the telephone goes through Alaska to Vietnam. And when she answered the phone, they said, this is U.S. military calling from Alaska. And my mother said, Alaska? He said he's in Vietnam. She didn't believe me. I said, yes, I am in Vietnam. So the radio stations, TV, they said, yes, he's in Vietnam. So I thought that was kind of funny, like that. So.
And what's the process like in getting over there? Is it just a big group of guys in one big plane, or how did they just kind of pile you in?
Very good question. I flew from New Jersey to Oakland Air Base in California. And I saw two other guys that I went to OCS with. So, however, leaving Oakland, it's like a 24-hour flight to go to Vietnam. We stopped off on Wake Island, and I thought we were going to crash. The island is so small, and the plane's coming down. I said, I don't see any land. And sure enough, and when we got off, you could see both ends of the island. I said, holy mackerel. So, and that was a famous battle during World War II. And then we got up and then went into Vietnam, and it was hot, very, very hot like
Right.
that. So, wow.
So touch back on basic training. You said you did it in Georgia, or that's where you...
No, that Fort Polk, Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Kentucky, okay.
That's
And
right.
what was that like? I know you said it was very tough, but what were some, major things that
It
you
was
remember?
grueling, extremely hot. And when I was in college, I knew it was going. I said, you know what? And a lot of my fraternity brothers were going in the service. So probably our senior year, we started running, doing exercises. So I think it was a little ahead of the game. 'Cause a lot of guys that come in the Army, and if they're out of college, they have beer bellies and all that stuff. So they had to lose it all.
Mm-hmm.
But that summer it was very, very hot
Yeah.
in Kentucky.
Now,
So-
did you get in any trouble or anything while you were out there? Did you play any pranks on friends? Anything that you're
we
willing
did.
to tell us?
No. Not really. Rolling it together. A lot of laughs, of course, and fooling around. But you had to be extremely disciplined, and that's what you have to learn. And if you did something wrong, you paid for it.
Right.
I did something wrong, and they were giving everybody a pass for the afternoon. And I said, I got to stay here. So, you had to march, I guess about 50 feet back and forth for a couple hours. So I'm doing that, and before the guys got past, I can see them all coming in from the field, hot, tired. Some of the guys were getting sick. I said, well, what happened to you guys? They said they really busted us, and they had a low crawl. It seems like a half a mile. And they were tired, sweaty. Their arms were all cut up. And I said, I guess I'm lucky I'm here. I missed all that stuff. So, but yeah, in the Army, you had to have a sense of humor.
Now, when you were in the Army, was the only place that you went, was it just Vietnam, or was there any other locations you went to?
I went right after training, and then I got my orders for Vietnam. And I got home for Christmas. Then I had to go down to Panama for jungle training. And that was very, very good training. You really learn there. And then I came home from there and then went right to Vietnam.
All right, I'm going to... Jungle training?
Jungle training, yes, I'm sorry.
What does that mean?
You're in the jungle for like 2 or 3 weeks. All right, it's just like realistic.
I'm guessing a lot of snakes, a lot of wildlife.
Well, you had to eat the snakes too. So yeah, we had to cut the head off a snake, cook it, and all that. You had to do this by yourself, like that. And one thing they give us a rat, and that was the worst. Oh my gosh, if I find a rat, I'm not going to kill the rat and eat it. But it was excellent training. And a lot of guys I'd gone to OCS with were there also.
So you brought up a good point with food. That was going to be another question I had for you. So, in your jungle training, you said you're eating snakes and rats. When you got to Vietnam, how do you eat? What do you do?
Yeah, I went to Vietnam with 2 other guys that I'd gone through OCS with. And I worked in an operations center, tactical operations center. So I was underground inside the post. However, to get at what I did, I worked from 5 in the afternoon to 7 the next morning. And what I had to do, I was responsible, if you take this room here, it was like our post. We had 182 bunkers, foxholes, and 11 towers. So I had to work at night, and we had to communicate with all the towers especially. And if we got attacked, right across from me in the table next to me, I was in charge of the operations center. I had a lieutenant for artillery and another one for communications if something broke down. If we were attacked, they would call into me. Right across the room, I'd say, situation, firing going on, Tower 11. He would call up, and it wasn't the Americans that were shooting the artillery. It was the Thai Army, which is 4 miles away. So they would shoot into that area. We gave them the location, they'd shoot into it. So that's what I did. But, that's was it 12, 14 hours a day. They were long days.
Right.
And I didn't get to eat too much, only breakfast. And forget lunch because I was trying to sleep.
Right.
But it was hard to sleep because of the extreme heat.
Right. Is there somebody that you served with that you remember fondly, like a best friend or anything that you still talk to or think about?
Unfortunately, I haven't talked to him, but I was close to the two guys because we were in the same place for a whole year. I know one was from New Orleans, and the other one was from, I think, Hampton, Virginia. But after that,
But you lost contact with them?
Like that, yeah.
Are there habits you developed in the military that you still do today, like make your bed every day, pick up your clothes, fold the sheets correctly?
No, I don't have to worry about that. When you're an officer, like that. No, that didn't have to. I'm used to getting up early, and getting out and doing stuff.
Right.
So now I think a lot of guys, because you put in so many hours, and you're busy.
Yeah.
You're always busy.
Is there any fun, specific stories you'd want to share or get into, or anything that?
Yeah, I have one. I think you're going to love it because I think you guys remember Bob Hope.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in November 1970, they called me into the office, headquarters, and they said, "Lieutenant, we have a special assignment for you." And the first thing on my mind was, uh-oh, what's this going to be? They said, "You're going to work on the Bob Hope Show." And I said, oh, I remember his shows. Growing up, they were always on TV, always in January, and they showed about the troops around the world, especially in the war zones. Mm-hmm. And my job was provide security for him and the whole show. And a smile came on my face. I said, and I knew that year the Gold Diggers. There were like 8 pretty girls that were going to do dance in front of the troops. And I said, and then I said, you know what, there's a lot of danger on there. Because I remember from the shows, not only did they show the show being, but they showed you quite often the troops, out in the fields. And I said, oh my God, I'm going to be looking at, my year, they had 25,000 soldiers in one location. And all I could see at our post is probably surrounded by 60% jungle around the post. So they could be out there easily shooting in mortars or bombs right into the center of the soldiers. The only place they could, and you could just see, they're going to be trampled to death, a lot of them. The only place they could run to were buses, because they came in on buses in different parts of Vietnam. And I said, this is going to be a real hazard. and thank God nothing happened. But seeing all the troops, I always remember, and I showed it to the old guard one year, the tapes of the Bob Hope show, and they absolutely loved it. It was something I never forgot.
Right.
And I did get to dance with one of the gold diggers at an officers club the following day.
Did you have any children? You have any children? Did they follow in your footsteps?
Yes.
And go into the Army? And all?
As a matter of fact, as we speak, my youngest, he'll be 36, he's a major in the Army, went to Montclair State and then on to Seton Hall while he was going to Montclair State to ROTC. He's a major in Texas right now.
Very cool.
Like that, so.
And what?
He's been into Afghanistan too.
What would you like people to know about serving your country?
Please do it. I think right now we need it. I like history and I read a lot of war stories. And I read about the buildup during World War II, and we have to be prepared. And we had a draft, but I know we're way down in our numbers right now. And what's going on today, unfortunately, I think something's going to happen in various locations. Again, this is just like World War II, not only from the Pacific side, but also from the Middle East, and also Ukraine. So we have very hot spots, and we have to gear up. There's no question. Book I read, Freedom's Forge, and it showed a great book about how we built up during World War II. We took our GM plants. Instead of making cars, they made tanks. Out in California, they started building ships. I truly believe we have to do that now. I think it's a big necessity. Because between Russia, Iran, what's going on in China, there's a lot of hot spots, especially today as we speak. That's it. So.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you very much for doing this,
Thank
sharing
you for
your
having
stories.
me, and for all the veterans too.
Yes.
We appreciate this.
Yes. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Continuing our Veterans Day celebration, we have Marty Halo with us today. Marty, if you could just give us your name, the branch you served, and the years of service that you had.
My name is Martin Halo. I got drafted in January of 1964, did basic training in Fort Dix, went to Fort Riley, Kansas, in the 1st Infantry Division, okay? And then the division moved to Vietnam.
So you went to Vietnam.
Yes, 1965, 66.
All right, and you said you were drafted.
Yes.
How did that make you feel?
Uh,
Was it something you were
My
knew
mother
it was
said
coming?
the mail came, and you're going in the Army. How did it make me feel? I can't explain it. It just is a setback.
All right. So how did your family take it? How did you
It was
tell your
total
family?
shock. But then again, I didn't hear of too many until I connected, because it wasn't like 17 guys I graduated with got drafted at the same time. But you don't see them every day, so you don't know, And that's how that happened.
Yeah. So now, when you left your family here, and you got to Vietnam, did you create a new family? How did that all?
Well, the Vietnam experience is the same as the stateside experience. You're part of a crew, a squad, or a group. And within that group, you become close to certain people, because there's people from all over the country. And in that group, you have to perform. And if one guy doesn't perform, somebody can die. So those people you have close to you. Now, when you leave to come back home, you inside have a problem in a way, because that was a family in an extreme situation that nobody was used to. And then you have your family that you came home to, which was great. And so that's how that happened.
Right. So it's kind of like being a part of a team, and you have to step up for your teammates, for your family, for your new
Right.
family.
But no matter what you do after the game is over, you're still part of the team.
Right. And so where did you end up having to do your basic training?
Fort Dix.
Fort Dix. You know, one question I have for you is, you know, what is your definition of a veteran?
All veterans served at different times, and they served in different places, but they all completed the mission. And when they came home to make America better. That's my definition of a veteran.
Yeah. You know, when you served, did you go anywhere else other than Vietnam, or was that the only location that you went to?
No, that was the only location that we went to. I was in the Iron Triangle. And the Iron Triangle is like a midpoint going across the country. You have Saigon near the ocean, and the Iron Triangle is more in the middle, and then further out is Cambodia. So we served in the area of Cambodia and that type of thing.
You know, is there anybody or someone when you served that you remember fondly? You know, friends that you made, officers, lieutenants, anything that you remember?
Okay? You come home and you rebuild your life and you know, your job and your whole way of living, because everything changed since you left. And it was, I guess, in the 70s that I came home one night late from work. It was dark, and I opened the front door, and the living room and everything was dark. But down the end was the light in the doorway to the kitchen. And my wife was in the doorway, and she said to me, "You just missed a phone call that you really wanted." And so I was in the kitchen, and she told me that Benny Master Antonio from Detroit was on the phone. And he said to her, "I'm Benny, and I served with your husband. And you don't know me, but I wanted to get in touch with him again." And she said to him, "I know you. My husband speaks of you, and you're in the pictures." And he cried. So we've been speaking, and then he gave me the name of Terry Tremmy in Louisiana and Oshel Daniels in West Virginia. And all this time we've been speaking with each other. Okay? Birthdays, holidays, you know, Christmas, that type of thing. And last year in June, I lost Oshel Daniels. And this past September 22nd, I lost Terry Tremmy in Louisiana. Last year, my wife and I, my son, went to Key West. And on the way back, the flight got canceled, and the only way we could get to another flight was in West Palm Beach. And I called up Benny Master Antonio because he spends the winters
In Florida.
in Florida. And I got to spend the day with him. It was the first day I've seen him in 56 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yes.
You know, you spoke of your wife. Did you, you know, before you got drafted, did you, I don't know, how old were you when you got drafted? Did you
I
know
don't
your wife?
remember any.
Did you know your wife before you got
No.
drafted? Okay, so you met her after.
Yes.
So, you know, how does she feel about you being a veteran, and, you know, does she notice things that you do from being, you know, enlisted or drafted, and things that you do now? Does she see any of those things?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking of that since May, actually. I was in front of the ShopRite for the Buddy Poppies, and I want to thank everybody that contributed to the Buddy Poppies this past May. I wanted to put together something for the wife of a veteran, because nobody's done that. And when you hear a word or a sound, the veteran stops because it brings it up. And she's next to you. And so the phone call from Benny that night, she's standing in the kitchen while I'm trying to get a hold of Benny. What does she see? She don't see the same guy that she's been living with. Now this past weekend I was down at my house and we went to the diner for dinner, and walking into the diner was a tall black man, and he was walking as if he had hip surgery, a little limp. And I had my hat on that said Vietnam veteran. And we got into the lobby and he turned around and he says to me, I was in Vietnam. And we shook hands. I asked him where he was and all that type of thing. But he was there the same years I was. Now how do you explain? And she's standing there.
Right.
You can't explain that from her viewpoint. So we go inside and we sit down and we have dinner. And he comes over and says, you know, nice meeting you and all that, and leaves. And I called him my brother because it was that much of an impact.
Right.
And just before we got done eating, the owner of the diner came over and said, your meal's paid for. I mean, where do you go with that?
Yeah.
You know, these are just things that you can't come up with and explain. And she's across from me.
Right, it's hard to explain to her that brotherhood.
So I really want to put something together about the woman who's been taking care of the veteran, because she knows when it comes veterans time, by the stare, by the silence, even by the body movements in some cases.
Right.
So that's where I'm at with that.
Very cool. One last question. What would you like people to know about serving your country?
Well, you go into the service and you follow orders. It's a discipline. And the discipline is there. It's called training. And the training is what keeps you alive. But once you get into a situation, the training is all forgotten and you automatically do what you're going to do. Okay? And so what does the veteran do for America? It keeps America free. And one of the key definitions of keeping America free is the right to vote. And when you see a veteran and you say to him, thank you for your service, you'll never know what it means inside, because you can't. And you do that, and we appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Marty. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for taking your time.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay.
As a part of the Veterans Day celebration, SYLS would like to thank all of the veterans for their service. Today we have Steve Hoffman with us. And Steve, you know, if you can just give me your name, the branch you served, and your years of service.
Okay, I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, commissioned 64, went on active duty 66, and retired in 92.
That's a long time.
It's a long time. 2 active duty tours, the rest were in the reserves.
Now, did you enlist? Were you drafted? I know, where did you go?
I volunteered through college. When I was in college, I went to the Army ROTC program. My family thought I was crazy to do it, but for me, I knew it was the right thing to do. And I went to college in New York, same school that Colin Powell went to, a few years difference. And believe it or not, I thought it'd be a good way to find out how the world exists the other side of the Hudson River. Simple as that.
Very cool. How did you tell your family that you were going to, enlist and go to the Army? How did your mom feel about that? How did that go?
That's a fair question. My dad was drafted towards the end of World War II, and I was born 42. I remember when he came home in 1945. So vivid memory. I think my dad was kind of proud that I was willing to take that step forward. My mother thought that I was crazy. And she said, "No, your cousins don't do it, none of your friends don't do it." But I said, everyone does what they want. And at that time, you had the draft anyway. So even if I didn't want to become an officer, chances are I would be drafted. So I said, this is my decision, here's what I want to do. And they really had no choice, but they understood.
Right. Now, where did you do basic training?
Well, my basic training was done between my junior and senior year in college. And it was Indian Town Gap Military Reservation. And the people who were in basic training with me were all cadets looking to get a commission. And that was 1963.
1963. And how was basic training? Did you get in trouble? Did you play any pranks on friends? Did you
No.
have any funny stories that you were willing to share?
Yeah. I'm not a great athlete, but I'm in pretty good physical shape. And I would usually lead the platoon in exercise. But I didn't do anything else. So one day one of the officers said, "Hoffman, you're really good with that. Why don't you try something else?" And I just brushed them off. I just wasn't interested. Most of the guys I met were basically decent guys, and I didn't have any problems at all.
Now, when you went, and served, were you overseas, or where did you go? Where was, some of the places that you went to?
Well, I went on active duty in 1966 after I finished grad school. And it's a side story, but it's interesting. One of the other students in grad school was an Army lieutenant colonel who was retiring. He was stationed in New York. I got my orders. It's very hard to understand military orders. And he said, "Lieutenant, you're going to wind up in Vietnam." And I'll be very honest with you. I said, "That's not my choice. But if I have to go, you go." I was at Oakland Army Base where they ship people out and where they came back. You spoke to Brian Boyle.
Yep, he mentioned Oakland Army Base.
Oakland Army Base. The work I did, the top priority was Oakland Army Base. So I was there for little over 2 years, 2 years and 1 month. And the only time I was overseas was I had 2 tours in Germany, but that was later on in the 1980s.
Right. Let's see. Is there anybody, friends that you made or someone there that you served with that you remember fondly, that you still talk to, that you wish you still talked to?
There's one fellow, and his name is Colonel Bill Dean. And when we went on active duty in '66, when you're a new officer, before you get your branch assignment, you go to branch school. And we were in that same class. We didn't see each other for years. We wound up in the same reserve unit in 1986. And to this day, we keep in touch. We're not the closest of friends, but we're friends. He's a very bright guy. He graduated from Fordham University. And the reason why I mention this, and this is part of the beauty of the United States, I'm of the Jewish faith. I'm not religious, but I'm proud of my heritage. Every time there's a Jewish holiday, he'll always call me and say, "I know it's your New Year's." And I call him when it's Christmas, and same thing with Easter, and we get together, 2-3 times a year.
Nice.
And so I think I have a positive impression of him.
Right. Are there any habits that you developed in the military that you still do today? Like make your bed every day, pick up your clothes, tuck in the sheets, things like that.
Well, my mom was a drill sergeant, so I learned all those things before I went in the service.
Fair enough. You know, you mentioned that you were married, or you're married, you know.
Yeah, oh,
Did
sure.
you know your wife before you went into the Army? Did you know her then? How does she feel about it now? You know, is there moments that she looks at you and says, oh, this is the veteran coming out of him?
Oh, she says that every day. She says, oh, you must have loved being an officer. This is my second marriage. We were married almost 30 years. And I met my wife in December 1990. December 1990. A week later, I was activated. And I remember I called her up and I said, gee, I want a free trip, but I can't tell you where. And quite honestly, she couldn't care one way or the other. And, but when I came back, we started to go out, and the rest is history.
Very cool. You know, what would you like people to know about serving your country?
Okay, that most of us who serve are not John Wayne types. We're not heroes, but we're willing to accept our responsibility. You always hope that everything's going to turn out okay, but you don't pass the buck to someone else. You learn that, hey, it's your country, do the best you can for your country and for yourself. I can look in the mirror and I have no regrets. I see a young guy or a young woman in uniform. My initial instinct is to go over and say hello. I taught college part-time for many, many years. First question, who served? And initially I would tell them, I know affirmative action. Part of it is to give credit to veterans. I said, but if you play me dirty, I'll shoot you in the kneecaps. So I'm proud of it. We're all volunteers. I have a grandson. He probably doesn't want to join, and God bless him. But if there was a draft, I would expect him to join.
Right.
I mean, I would expect him to answer the call to arms, I should say.
Now, did any of your kids follow in your footsteps and join the military?
No. My son is a bruiser, great guy. He said, Dad, if there was a draft, I certainly would comply, but otherwise, he had no desire for it.
Right. All right. Well, that concludes it.
Sure.
Really appreciate you coming in, and thank you so much for your service and time.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'd like to start off by thanking all veterans for their service. And just before I introduce Charlie Quinn, I can tell from my years in service, this guy was highly decorated, and he was in combat. So would you mind, Charlie, starting by telling us your name, your branch of service, and the years you served?
Oh, sure, Steve. My name is Charlie Quinn. I served in 1967 to 1969. I was in the United States Army. I got drafted off the streets of Newark like a lot of guys in those days. And currently I'm the chaplain of the VFW, and the guys have some fun with that. Of course, I'm Charlie Chaplain. So we all have fun. I get elected every year. It's a landslide election.
It's divine providence.
Thanks.
How did you tell your family when you got your draft notice?
Oh, well, we were sitting at the kitchen table in Newark, and I remember there was a date. It was February 13th, and my mother said, will I be home that night? And I said, no, Mom, probably I won't be. And because it says take enough money for a month and maybe an extra pair of underwear or two. And so she was, well, and then the other one, I know I'm jumping, but when I was assigned to Fort Polk, I came home from leave. And my mother asked me, where am I going after that? So I had to break that news to her also, that I was going to Vietnam.
How did your mom react when you told her you were going to that jungle paradise?
Well, she was a little upset, but I want to jump again. What I did is I didn't, maybe I shouldn't have done it, but I snuck home from Vietnam. So it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and I rang the doorbell, and I was in uniform, and that's not a good thing in those days to have a guy with the uniform on.
Sure.
So I didn't think of that at the time, but my mother was hysterical upon my return.
Well, but thank God you came back. Can you tell us about your experiences when you went through basic training?
Oh, but, well, you know, it's funny now. You look back at it, and it's fun now. But going through it, you know, there was no such thing. You know, time. It was just you woke up early in the morning and you went to bed late at night, and you had intensive training all day. You had live fire. You're crawling underneath barbed wire, and they're shooting machine gun things over your head, and then you're learning hand-to-hand combat. And they say, don't go downtown tonight and try any of this stuff. That was they don't want you to get hurt downtown. So they did that. But it was, but the one thing is when you were assigned for a polk, then you knew where your next duty assignment was. And that was, they called it Tigerland. And it was hot as anything. Just
Hot
to get,
and humid, just
and-
like Vietnam.
yeah, they were getting us ready for Vietnam, and it was good. And then that was all simulated VC things jumping at us, and a VC like a Vietnam Cong village and all. It was all geared. They woke us up so early, and that was like ridiculous, like 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever. But it was just to toughen us up. You know, kids from Newark, we had to get tough. So.
Well, you guys were tough from Newark, but a different type of environment.
Yeah, that's right.
When you look back at your time in uniform, is there any one individual or some individuals that come right to your mind?
Well, his name is Captain Conley, and he was promoted to major, but I affectionately still refer to him as Captain Conley. What happened is I was in the mortar platoon. I was just a little guy in the mortar platoon. And then his radio operator was going on leave. So Captain Conley called me in, and he said, would I be his radio operator? I said, sure, of course. I think it's a good job. Little did I know, but no, but it was quite a promotion. And then after the RTO came back from leave, he didn't get the radio back. I kept it. So I was honored. I mean, I had what they called the battalion net. I called in airstrikes and gunships and medevacs and sea rations and all this stuff. And I was Bravo. And my email to this day, it's Bravo 6 Kilo, because I'm so proud of that. Captain Conley was Bravo 6. I was his Kilo, and I'm very proud of that.
One thing that you didn't say, which is true, being a radio person, you were a prime target.
Well, yeah, I found that out. They like officers, medics, and radio operators.
Oh, sure.
I could get you the gunships. I could, shoot the bad guys. So yes, you're right, Steve. That was a little minor detail. But somebody asked me questions about the radio, and I didn't know anything. I don't know anything about the radio. They just gave it to me. We learned the phonetic alphabet in training, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. And I didn't know I was going to be using it all that time. And it was that was fun. It's on-the-job training for sure.
Well, Americans, by and large, are very good to adapt to situations.
Right.
And you proved it.
Thank you.
Did you know your wife before you went in the service?
Actually, we're high school sweethearts.
Oh,
so
God.
we met. We were engaged. We'll say when I went to Vietnam, we were engaged, and then soon after I came home, we became engaged, and then, we were not engaged. I'm sorry, we engaged when I came home, and then I would receive letters at Fort Hood that I just rented an apartment, I just bought a couch. So I pretty much the day of the wedding, I just had to show up. So that was good.
No, that's super. What would you like for people to know about serving our nation?
Serving our nation is a great thing to do. It makes you such a different, I don't want to say better person. It does, of course, but it makes you a different person. Like, here I am, a kid in Newark. I had my first plane ride. Nowadays, I think my grandson's been to Bermuda and Puerto Rico, but in our day, oh my goodness, you're getting on this airplane and yes, I'll have a scotch. I remember. Going to Vietnam, I had a scotch. I remember that. But no, it was. I think it was good for us. I know there's sayings that people say, hey, everybody should serve our country, Peace Corps or something. I agree. It helps you. It really does.
I concur with that too.
Thank you.
Because even though people will not initially admit it, When they had their second breath, it aided them in developing a sense of responsibility and maturity. And that's very, very important.
Thank you.
Charlie, there's one story you didn't tell us that I remember. How did you feel when you landed in Vietnam when they opened the door?
You know, it's funny. I told Steve this story a long time ago, right?
You didn't think I remembered, right?
Oh boy! But I said hi. Well, it was a Braniff airline. I forget. They used to paint them different colors, and I said hi. We're just landing in Vietnam right now. It's 110 degrees in the shade, and I said, oh. And then I opened up the door, and there was a blast. Oh, you could really feel the blast of hot. And I says, I'm going to stay on. I'm going to take the trip back to Newark. Thank you. If I could. I wish I could have. It was hot. It was.
I really can't think of any additional questions. Anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, no, I think you've covered it. I really enjoy doing this. Thank you.
Well, I'm proud to associate with my fellow veterans. He's one of my buddies.
Thank you.
God bless our nation, and God bless our troops, and God bless our veterans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome, Steve.
Firstly, I want to thank all veterans for their service, and it's my pleasure right now to introduce Colonel Peter Brukowski, U.S. Air Force, retired. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I guess you want to know about how I became a veteran. Most people talk about whether they're a military family or not. I never considered my family to be military, but my father got his draft notice on his 18th birthday. He didn't get a notice. On his 18th birthday, he went down to register for the draft. That was November 7th of 1918. 4 days later, First World War was over, and they abolished the draft. By the time Pearl Harbor came around, he was in his 40s. He was the sole supporter of a wife and 2 children and a third one on the way. So he was never drafted into the Second World War. But all his sons served. My oldest brother, Paul, was in the Army. He was in Korea. My next older brother, Alan, was in Japan in the Air Force, both during peacetime. This was in the late 50s. And I graduated from college in 1964. I had a deferment because they had reinstated the draft, and I knew I was going to be drafted unless I stayed in school. I went to law school for 3 more years, got 3 more years of deferment, and I realized that in 1967 I was going to be drafted because I had extended liability for 7 years. And that 3rd year in law school, things were starting to heat up in Vietnam. So what I did was early that 3rd year, I decided to apply for an officer training program. I didn't want to be drafted and just spend 2 years in the Army. They would have sent me to Fort Dix. I would have learned how to crawl on my belly, and I probably would have gone to Vietnam right after that for 2 years. But I felt as though I had a college degree, I could be productive as an officer. So I applied for the Navy Officer Candidate School, and they didn't accept me because I wore glasses. My next choice was the Air Force, and they did accept me because glasses were not a problem. 9 out of 10 people in the Air Force do not fly, so they took me, which meant that I was going to go to officer training school for 12 weeks, and then I would have a 4-year active duty obligation. I was sworn in after law school in the summer of 1967. I went up to Albany, took the oath as an enlisted man, drove down to San Antonio. It was the first time I'd ever been in the South. Spent 12 weeks at Lackland Air Force Base, learning in 12 weeks how to become an officer. The same kind of things that ROTC students would learn over the course of 3 or 4 years, or that an academy graduate would learn in a 4-year course at the Air Force Academy. I guess they figured that they could cram it into 12 weeks because we were all college graduates, a little more mature than most of the officer candidates for officers. When I finished officer training school, was commissioned as a second lieutenant. I got orders to a base in Northern California, a SAC base, and I was assigned, my duty assignment was going to be in the career field of the Office of Special Investigations. OSI agents are trained to conduct all of the major criminal, counterintelligence, and fraud investigations for the Air Force, and also do all the background investigations. A lot of people in the Air Force require background investigations, and the OSI was the agency that conducted these. So at this base, I went to this base in California, then they sent me to Washington for 10 weeks to become an agent, and went back to California, and when I said we do background investigations, it wasn't just for people who needed clearances at my base in California, but people who needed clearances at any base, anywhere in the world. But if they happened to have lived in Northern California or gone to school there or worked there, we had to do those leads. We had to find references. We had to check criminal and financial records. And that was all part of this process of granting a clearance. I fully expected, since this was right after Tet, the Tet offensive happened in January of '68, right after I graduated from officer training school. I fully expected I'd be at this base in California for 1-2 years, and then I'd get orders to go to Southeast Asia. That's what was happening with everybody. I don't know how it happened, but for some reason, I stayed at that base for 4 years. Very unusual. My 4th year, I was the commander of the OSI detachment there, and then my date of separation came about, and I got out. I was planning on getting out, and then at the last minute, an opportunity came up. They had an opening for Dutch language school. Now, in the OSI, that meant only one thing, because we only had one person stationed in the Netherlands, okay? And he was the OSI resident agent for the Netherlands, a really great job. First, they'd send you to Monterey for 52 weeks of language training, and then you'd get this one position in the Netherlands. And then after that, when you come back to the States, you usually get your choice of assignment. So I figured I could have been on my way to a military career. So I called up in Washington, and I said, you know what, I'd like to apply for this job. They looked at my resume. I had taken the language aptitude test, scored one of the highest scores they'd ever seen. I think they asked 56 questions on the test, and I got 55 of them right, you know. So he says, you're just what we're looking for, except for one thing. You've got a date of separation. So I said, I'll give you back the date of separation. I'll stay on active duty. And he said, no, we don't have the time. It's too much paperwork. We'll have to look for somebody else. So that was a road not taken. And I got out of service, drove back home, got a job working for Louis Lefkowitz, the Attorney General of the state of New York. And then I realized, you know, maybe I should keep active in the reserves. So I tried to get back into the OSI reserves. Couldn't get in. So I got into the intelligence field. Didn't care for that so much. And then I realized, hey, I'm a lawyer. I should get into the JAG. And we did have a JAG officer, a reservist, working in Lefkowitz's office. He helped me with the paperwork, transferred into the JAG, and I spent the next 23 years in the JAG Reserve. New York State was wonderful. They have very liberal laws with regard to reserve and National Guard duty. If you're working for the state, they'll give you up to 30 days a year for reserve duty at no loss in pay, no loss in vacation time. So I was able to take advantage of that. And you know, when you're a careerist in the reserves, you really have to manage your calendar carefully in order to get good years. And I was able to do that. Got the promotions along the way. Graduated from Air War College, and the first few promotions were easy to get, but I realized to get to colonel, only about 12% of lieutenant colonels are being promoted. And there was one glaring omission on my record, and that is that I did not have SEA, Southeast Asia, on my record. I missed that opportunity. Right around that time came the first Gulf War, and I said, this is my makeup opportunity. So I informed my wife that I was going to volunteer to go back on active duty during what they then called Desert Shield. It was later changed to Desert Storm. They didn't send me to the Gulf, but they sent me to a base in Louisiana to backfill for a young captain, a JAG officer, who was being sent to the Gulf. And a whole series of reservists over the course of several months filling in, sitting at his desk while he was overseas. And I did make it to colonel. I got promoted. All of my reserve time up until that point had been at McGuire Air Force Base, which was very convenient, only about 70 miles away. I know a lot of reservists who had to travel 600-700 miles to get to their reserve base. But I stayed at McGuire. When I made colonel, the advice was, if you have any chance of making brigadier general, you want to get your face known outside of the area that you've been in for 20 years. So I was transferred up to Hanscom Field near Lexington and Concord up in Massachusetts, where I became the chief reserve coordinator for the headquarters electronic systems center for the Air Force. Spent 2 years there, then was reassigned to the Pentagon, where I spent 3 years at JAG headquarters, and came 1998, that was the end of the line. So I had to retire. June 1st, 1998, at a ceremony at the Pentagon. And during those last several years, I also had a secondary duty as a liaison officer, a recruiter for the Air Force Academy and the Air Force ROTC scholarship program. So that was really very satisfying extra work. A bunch of really fine young men and women I helped get into the Air Force Academy. Some of them became career officers, pilots, and it's my way of giving back to the Air Force to get these other young people started. And so that was the end of my Air Force career. I continued to work for the state of New York. I left Lefkowitz's office in the late 70s. I went to work at the Appellate Division of Supreme Court in New York, where I stayed for 33 years as a court attorney, as a clerk for 2 different judges, and my last 8 years there were as decision editor for the court. And I really loved that work. Retired in 2010. I also took a part-time job, a fun job, working for Major League Baseball, and I worked for them at night and on weekends for about 15 years until COVID. After COVID, that job disappeared. And so that's been my Air Force career, and I'm active with the Jewish War Veterans, as you know. A lot of my time is taken up with Veterans Matters. Coming up is our annual Veterans Day program on Sunday, November 12th. It's at Temple Beth Sholom. It's the day that Livingston honors all of its veterans who served in peacetime or in war. This time we're doing something a little different. We're also going to honor anyone who had a spouse or a parent who served in uniform. And I'd like to encourage everybody in Livingston to come out to that program. It's going to be on November 12th at 11 a.m. And it should be a nice program. And we'll also be showing an award-winning film called Diversity in the Long Gray Line, which is about recruitment at West Point. And any high school student or their parents of students who are applying or in the process of applying or thinking about applying for an appointment to West Point or any of the other service academies, Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, the Coast Guard Academy. I think you'd find this film very interesting. So I want to invite all those folks to come out to that program as well. I do other things in my retirement that make me feel as though I wonder how I ever had time to go to work, because I'm so busy on those things. I do the public reading of the Declaration of Independence every year on July 4th, which is something I started back in 2000. I run the International Minion for Jewish runners at the New York City Marathon each year. We've drawn thousands of people from all over the world to that thing. Another thing that I started back in 1983. And other than that, I'm just enjoying retirement.
Well, you've done very well, and I also want to mention that you are a recipient of the Legion of Merit, which is one of the highest government awards.
Thank you. And I have a son who served as a paratrooper in the Israeli Defense Forces. He was actually in San Diego. He works in Tel Aviv. He was actually in San Diego last week on business and was ready to go back on Saturday night from San Francisco, and his flight was canceled. So he's been staying with us for the last few days and is very anxious to get back. So it's kind of a tense period for us.
No, it is, and Israel will prevail. There's no question about it. It's a good ally of the United States.
What else you want to know?
Well, sir, I'm going to salute you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon. As a part of our Veterans Day celebration, we're here today thanking all of the veterans, and we're here with Walter Joyce. Walter, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
You know, if you can, just give us your name, branch that you served with, and how many years of service.
Walter Joyce, I was in the Army. I served 2 years, 1954 to 1956.
Okay. Now, did you enlist, or were you drafted, or what was the process for
I was
you?
happily drafted. I was, the Korean conflict had just subsided. So when I went in, there was no battles overseas, but I was drafted at that time.
So you were drafted. So how did your family take it at the time? You know, did your mom cry? Were you?
Well,
but you said you were
fortunately-
happy.
Well,
so.
fortunately, the war, there was no firing going on at that time. It was a ceasefire. And no, I think, truthfully, looking back on it now, they probably thought it might be a good thing for me to go into service. So I had just graduated from high school. I didn't have much of a job, and I wasn't going to college at that time. And so, yeah, I was drafted.
Where did you do your basic training?
Fort Dix, New Jersey, and all 16 weeks, 8 weeks, and then another 8 weeks And after that, I stayed there for a little while, and then was sent overseas, Okinawa. That was 10 years after the Second World War, thank God.
And do you remember a lot from basic training? You know, did you get in trouble? Was it tough? You know, did you play
Ironically-
some pranks on friends and get, you know?
When I was in basic, myself and a lot of guys, we used to duck the MPs. You know, if we saw the MPs, we would go the other way. Not that we were doing anything terrible, but we were just trying to stay out of trouble. And later on, that's where I was placed. Not that I volunteered to be an MP, but when I got off the boat in Okinawa, I had a choice. Stay on this deuce and a half and be an MP, or get off and get back on the boat and go to Korea. So I stayed on the deuce and a half and became an MP.
Very cool. Now, you said that you went to Okinawa. Did you serve anywhere else overseas or anything like that?
No, I served all my time on Okinawa as an MP. And it was good duty. Most of the time it was just patrolling and no big deal. The only time that we really had any trouble was payday. So we had the Marines there, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. And so on payday, when the guys would go to the clubs and have a little bit of liquor, we had some action.
So you never served in wartime or anything like
No.
that? It was, okay. You know, are there any habits that you developed from being in the military that you still do today? Like make your bed every day, pick up your clothes, tuck in your sheets, you know?
Just the opposite. I was spoiled when I was in the service. I had I forget what we called them, but there were people there that took care of us. They shined our shoes, they pressed our clothes, washed our clothes, made our beds, served our food. I mean, they did practically everything but brush our teeth, and so we were spoiled.
Yeah.
And but I got out of that habit pretty quickly. As soon as I came home, I had to do everything myself.
You know, is there any stories that you would like to tell, or a fond memory that you have from when you served? Is there anything that, you know, pops in your head that was
Well, the
interesting?
one thing my family likes to hear is one of the things we did overseas was one of the starlets came over to entertain the troops, and I was Debbie Reynolds, and I was one of the fellows that was asked to provide some protection for her while she was on the island. So that's one thing looking back on. Other than that, truthfully, I was very fortunate. I had a lot of good times while I was in the service. And as far as habits are concerned, well, I was a smoker before I went to the service, but I continued that pretty heavily. And I really didn't drink much before the service, if at all. And so I used to like that. I do a little bit of that now, just a little. That's about it.
All right. And then my final question would be, what would you like people to know about serving your country?
Well, I myself, I got a lot out of it. I met a lot of good people while I was in the service. It was the first time I flew, the first time I went anywhere outside of Newark. And so it was a good experience for me. I was also with people from different backgrounds. I think that was good for me. And then when I got out of the service, I had a GI Bill, which was great. I was able to get my college education. And so truthfully, America's been good to me. And I'm glad that I was able to serve those 2 years.
That's great. Well, again, thank you for your service. Thanks for coming and talking. Appreciate it. Thanks, Walter.
Thank you.
Good morning, and a part of the Veterans Day celebration, we'd like to thank our veterans, and we're here with George Walsh, and we'd like to thank you for your service, George. We're just here going to ask you a couple questions. So, George, if you could tell us your name, the branch you served, and the years of service you've had.
Okay, so my name is George Walsh, and I was in the United States Army, and I served beginning in January of 1969 until late in 1971. I think it was September, October, November, somewhere around there.
All right. Now, did you enlist? Were you drafted? How did
Good
that
question.
go about?
Well, I was draft eligible, but I did enlist ultimately. I graduated from college in June of 1968, and the Vietnam War was raging pretty heavily at that time. So I knew I was healthy and I would be called 1A in the draft board, and I would be drafted. So I went talking to recruiters. At first I wanted to be a pilot, but I went to the Air Force and they gave me an eye test and they said, George, I'm sorry to tell you, but your eyes are getting weak. We can't take you. So I said, well, maybe the Navy has different standards. So I went to the Navy over in Brooklyn and they told me the same thing. And then I talked to all the other recruiters and I wound up signing up with the Army because they offered a 4-month deferment of my enlistment. So I was able to get a job, go to work, and not go in the military until January of 1969, which I did. And the 4-month deferment was because I signed up for Officer Candidate School option. And if you go to Officer Candidate School, you then have an option on graduation as to whether to take the commission or not. And if you don't, you become an E5 pay grade. I took the commission and ultimately wound up in Vietnam.
Okay. So you ended up going to Vietnam. So one of the questions, did you serve overseas and where did you serve?
Yes. Well, before Vietnam, I got out of OCS in February of 1970. And they first sent me to Fort Hood, Texas. I always thought that was to get acclimated to the heat. And I spent a couple months there. Then they gave me a month leave before reporting to San Francisco and on to Vietnam. So I got there in early 1970. I forget exactly what month, March, I think, April. And then I spent there until I was there 7 months. I was going on R&R and wound up in a vehicle accident. So I was injured and sent to the hospital there in Da Nang and then medevaced home as a result of the injury. It was non-combat, so no Purple Heart or anything like that. But I saw enough that I was ready to go home.
All right. And then where did you do your basic training?
Basic training was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which the nickname is Fort Lost in the Woods. It's well south of St. Louis and Columbia, and it pretty much is in the woods. And that was an engineer basic training. And for some reason, I wound up there. I'm not sure why. I should have gone to Fort Sill, but there was some kind of a hang-up with my security clearance for OCS. And they dig so deeply, they must have found some minor transgression that I made during college, I guess. And it took them a little longer to clear me. But ultimately, I was cleared, and then I stayed at Fort Leonard Wood for engineer advanced training, which again, I should have been at Fort Sill for the artillery because I was going to OCS artillery candidate, which I wound up there ultimately. And as I said before, after OCS, I went to Fort Hood, Texas, and on to Vietnam.
Right. Now, how was basic training for you? Was it tough? Did you get in trouble? Did you have fun? Did you play pranks on from friends there?
Well, I wouldn't say any of it was fun necessarily. Fort Leonard Wood, for some reason, gets a lot of people from the South and from Chicago. And I guess because I was going to Fort Sill, they sent me halfway there or 3/4 of the way there. And it was the first time in the in-processing before we actually got into training. The training, I was in bad physical condition from having spent 4 years in college and not really active athletically or anything like that. So it was a little tough in the beginning physically. Mentally, no problem. Basic training was a lot of exercise, and I lost a lot of weight and I got into shape. So that was good from that standpoint.
Good. A little about your family. When you decided to enlist, how did your family take it? Was your mom happy, sad?
Well, they supported me. They didn't give me any negativity about it. I think they were both very concerned because of what was going on in Vietnam, and figured that the chances are that I would wind up there, which is what turned out. I'm sure they were concerned, and probably my mom was sad, but they supported me.
Right. During the time that you served or at basic training, is there someone that you served with that you remember fondly, whether it was a officer or a friend or anything?
Well, there was a fellow by the name of Mike Wheeler that I got pretty close to, and we both went to, he was from Chicago, they're outside, South Bend, I guess, Indiana. And I actually wound up buying a car from him, a used car, a 1970 Chevy Nova, believe it or not. 3-speed on the floor. Fun car, and I drove that to Fort Hood, Texas. And when we got leave before going to Vietnam, we both went to Vietnam together. We wound up in San Francisco together before being deployed to Vietnam. After getting to Vietnam, we lost track of each other, but we did write some letters to each other afterwards. And I've since lost track of them over the years.
All right. Are there any habits that you developed while in the military that you still do today? Make your bed every day, pick up your clothes, tuck in your sheets a certain way?
Probably all of that. I tend to be on the neat side as a result, and particularly in officer candidate school, you didn't leave anything laying around. Everything was accounted for. In fact, they had inspections, I think it was daily. And one of the awards that were given were for, they called them batteries, which in the artillery it's a battery, and the infantry it's a company. And the battery that I was in had a history of winning the award, so we were schooled, I guess you would say, in making sure everything was strictly taken care of.
Right. Now,
So yeah, I would say my habits as a result are that I'm up early, I'm out of bed, shower and shave and all that, and I tend to dress neatly, I think, as a result, because they were always inspecting your uniform, and I check my gig line all the time. Guys will remember that.
Now, is there any other stories that you'd like to tell? Any, times that you remember that were either tough or?
Well, there were some good times. I got some leave out of Fort Leonard Wood. After being there for a while, they give you a weekend pass. Mm-hmm. And another fellow I remember by the name of Kolakowski, he was from New Jersey, and we kind of teamed up together. And in those days, I don't know if you still do it, but if you wear your uniform to a Major League Baseball game, you get in for free. Oh. Of course, you sit in the bleed seats, but it still was free, which meant a lot in those days because I think our pay was less than $100 a month. And so we went to St. Louis on the bus, and I went to the Arch,
Mm-hmm.
and we went to the ball game and some other things, just fooled around in St. Louis.
Very nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
And one of the last questions I have for you is, what would you like people to know about serving your country?
Well, it was always important to me to serve, and it's become even more important to me since. I later, after being away from the military for quite a few years, I guess maybe at least 10, I joined the VFW first and the American Legion, and I'm also a member of the Jewish War Veterans. I was not born Jewish, but I converted to Judaism along the way. And through these organizations, I've met many other veterans, all of whom are strongly patriotic, strongly committed to the military, and even though very few of them had easy service, many of whom were in combat, but they all appreciate that the United States military is strong, the training is excellent, and highly regarded around the world. One thing I do remember is upon returning to the United States, once I hit land and saw the American flag, I would say it brought a tear to my eye.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank you for your service. Appreciate you coming in today, talking about this.
Thank you very much.
And that's
it
all
was-
we have.
it was
Really
my
appreciate
honor
it.
to serve.
Thank you.